Okay. Test. Okay, there we go. All running proper. Okay. Morning. I think so. I think so. Less tech difficulties today than usual. So we're getting there. All right, everybody. Glad to have you all here.
It's called the weaklings.
Is that what it is? Glad to have everybody here. I know it is cold. It is cold. Couple quick things before we begin. Just a couple quick announcements, some prayer requests. Ruth Jones, her other leg has now been amputated. She's in Walterboro Hospital. I was told this morning by Harry. So definitely keep her in your prayers. Also, Gary Blumenstock was going to be preaching at Harmony this Sunday today, but his brother passed over the last week, and so he headed to Illinois. So he's up there. It's cold up there. There's ice and snow up there, so keep him in your prayers as well for travel mercy and that comfort for the loss of a loved one. And of course, just keep everybody in your prayers, right? Especially right now with the cold and everything. People. This is a difficult time of year for people when they're sick, and they can get more sick. And I've seen people pass lately just because of getting sick. Simple cold turns into pneumonia, turns into something that they can't handle. So keep everybody in your prayers, and keep bundled up, keep warm, and all that. We're going to continue our lesson in Proverbs today. I do have hopefully a couple good jokes for us, but who'd like to start us off in a prayer? Go ahead.
Gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much, Father, for your love for us and for allowing us to be in your house today. Thank you for our teacher, and get our hearts to be open to your word. And we pray for our friends, our brothers and sisters, Father, who are sick, lost loved ones, to be with them. Father, heal them, comfort them, and strengthen them. And we love you. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. And of course, keep Jim in your prayers as well. This time of year is probably pretty rough for you too. So, all right. So let's get started. I do have, like I say, I got a couple jokes. I think they're decent. I tried them out on a couple other people before you guys, so we'll see. I got 3 just in case, right? All right. So a farmer was in town at noon, and he went into a restaurant. He got a little hungry. Went into a restaurant for a hamburger and some French fries. Well, when he was served, he quietly bowed his head, gave the Lord thanks for his food, and some rough-looking guys, sitting a couple tables over, noticed all this and decided they were going to give this farmer a hard time. And so one of them called out, "Hey, farmer, does everyone do that where you live?" And he answered, "No, son, the pigs and the donkeys don't." So that's number 1. Yeah, exactly. What was that? I didn't hear you.
How old were the people you traveled out?
Yeah, well, had a good spread there. All right, second one. One morning, an offering plate was being passed at church, right? And a little 5-year-old boy it came past him, so he took off his tie and he put it in the offering plate. His mother saw him do it. She said, "What are you doing? Don't do that." And he said, "Mama, didn't you hear the pastor? He said we're supposed to give our tithes and offerings." So that's number 2. All right, I'll give you one more since I got a little bit of laugh. So a priest, a pastor, and a rabbi were talking, and the rabbi said to the pastor, he said, "Look, you've got a nice car, you got a house and all that." And he said, how is it that you've got, how are you doing things? How does that work? And how are you getting that kind of money from your church? And he said, "Well, what I do is I draw a line on the floor and I throw all the money that comes in from the tithes and offerings in the air, And what falls on the left, I give to God, or what falls on the right, I give to God, and what falls on the left, I keep. And so the rabbi said, oh, well, that's a great idea. I'm going to try that. And so the pastor notices this rabbi a couple months later, and he's in a Ferrari, right? He's now got this huge house he's heard. And so he says, look, he says, when we last talked, he said, I gave you some tips on how to do things. He said, but I noticed things your church must be doing really well. He said, tell me how you got all this money. And the rabbi said, well, he said, look, you gave me that tip. I really appreciate it. He said, but I kind of made a modification to it a little bit. He said, what I do is I throw the money up. What God keeps, he can have. I keep the rest. All right, that's third joke. All right. Okay, so we're still in the book of Proverbs. We're going to be there for a while, obviously, as we're going. We're going to try and pick up some speed, though. We've been spending a lot of time verse by verse. I'm hoping to get through at least, or not verse by verse, but a series of Proverbs by Proverbs, and we've been spending a lot of time on individual Proverbs. So I'm hoping we can pick up a little bit so we can get through. I don't want to spend a year on Proverbs, if we can. A lot of it is repetitious too, so a lot of this that we've talked about you'll see repeating as we go. But a quick recap of last week. When we finished our lesson last week, we had discussed the proverb that related to you being a cosigner or giving surety for a loan for someone that you don't know well. And we had a great discussion. It was really a good class, I think. We talked about the pitfalls of being in that situation, and that it might lead you to becoming a party to another person's sin, perhaps. And that's why this proverb is here, to keep us understanding that we need to be careful when we're in that situation. And many times we might not want to be in that situation at all, because it can lead to, like I say, what we discussed, either your own financial problems because you're giving surety for somebody else, they don't pay it, you then have to pay, or you might be party to their own sin. Why are they needing that money, etc., right? So it was a great lesson, just as applicable. Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize
Mm-hmm.
that what we hear the Lord say through our teachers,
Mm-hmm.
through the pastor, he's going to use.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to use. And even on last Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to two people. One young man who I'm pretty close to, and he was struggling with who he should help,
Right.
who he should not help.
Right.
And family members are difficult.
Right.
But like I reminded him that you know their history.
Sure. Exactly.
You know their expectations
Right.
of you and how they have handled money or things
Sure.
in the past. And just wanted to remind everybody that God's going to use what we hear
Certainly.
through His Word.
Well, I'm glad it actually happened, in your life, literally the same week. That's awesome. That's awesome. And you're absolutely right. I hope that if one person gets something out of these lessons, I think it's worthwhile. I hope more than one does. But yeah, indeed. Yeah.
More than one did.
Good. Do you have something you want to mention?
Our nephew, he was in the same nephew that was in the home where they were treating him for drug rehabilitation and everything, and he left early. And he didn't complete the entirety of the program, but he felt that he was in a good enough place to continue on his own at the house.
Right.
Ever since he's been back at the house, he's fallen into the same routine about, it seems like every week or every other week or so, he's needing something.
Right.
And this particular week, we had to just let it know that we weren't in a position to do that.
Good. I'm glad.
But
Glad it was helpful.
in his defense, a little, he didn't do the same thing, that he didn't respond the same way that he would normally.
Good.
It used to be where he would, go out
Right.
and, go throw out the guilt trip and everything, but this particular time, he just said, okay, and that was the end of the conversation. But we did have to put these principles into play.
Awesome.
Just let it, that wasn't something that we could do.
Awesome. You guys don't know how much that touches my heart to know that you guys literally had something happen the same week. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's really cool. And that's, look, these Proverbs, we look at them as a 2,000-year-old word, right? They're just as applicable today as they were 2,000 years ago. Now, we have to modify it a little bit, right? Like our loans that work today are different than back then, but it's still the same principle. It's still the same thought. And so these lessons are just as applicable now as they ever were.
And I
Yeah?
had to do the same thing with my daughter, my
Did you?
youngest daughter too, because she has the habit of, needing something to take care of a bill, and then
Right.
the next time you see her, she's got, packages being delivered to the house from Amazon or
Right.
whatever. And so I just told her, like, if you need help from me, I can help you, file for, unemployment, or I can help you do this, or I can help you do that, but as far as cash is concerned, I'm not going to do that.
Right. Right.
It's hard, it is hard when you talk about family.
It is.
And especially with youngsters, because they're just starting out.
Right.
You think, I've got to help them until they can get to your place. But if they do, even young people, if they're repeatedly not putting into practice the good counsel
Exactly.
that you're giving them, then if you're going to help them at all, you've got to stop
Right.
helping them.
Well, you got to help them in a different way.
That's right.
And that's indeed, that's hard. It's hard, but it's right, right? And usually what is right is not easy. At least in my experience, what's right tends to be the harder way to do things, usually, especially when you're talking emotion, right? And family and friends and all that. With a stranger, it's a stranger. But with family, it makes it a little bit more difficult, right? But I'm glad that there seems to be progress there. Even if it's a small bit of progress, that's progress, right? And latch onto that. Continue to look at that progress and meet it out. Continue to do it. That's great. I'm glad. And again, these are lessons we can apply all day, right? And I did want to mention one last thing before we moved on to our verses today, as we recap last week. And it's really, there was one last bit of that lesson that we didn't really get to because of the condensed time, because all the technical difficulties that we had. I even had somebody come up after the class and ask me some questions about what I'm about to mention. So I want to read Proverbs 6, 3 through 5. I'll read it real quick, and then I'll tell you what it is that we kind of left out. Of course, my son, you put up security, surety for your neighbor, right? Then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So what this is telling us is if we as Christians ever find ourselves in this situation where we have become surety or we have become a co-signer for somebody that we don't know, right? We did it in haste. We did it out of trying to be kind. And then we realized, oops, I shouldn't have done that. This person is not somebody that I know well enough to do that. And they may not use the money properly. They may misuse it or whatever, right? All those different things that we talked about last week. What this is saying is if you find yourself in that situation, go to the loan officer, the loan person that gave you the loan, right? And in today's world, that may not work. It may be a legal contract you've signed. It may be too late. But what this is teaching us is if you get in that situation, immediately go to that person that gave the loan and ask to be taken out of the loan, ask to be let free of the obligation for yourself. Now, I had also mentioned to the gentleman something that we had talked about during our discussion, and that was if you financially can do it, pay off the loan, and then have that person treat it as a gift in your mind. But tell that person, if you want to pay me back, pay me back. Instead of paying the loan officer or paying the loan off, pay me back. And if they pay you back, great, it's a bonus. If they don't, you've treated it as a gift in your mind and your heart. That's okay. You understand what I mean? So, and that was a suggestion somebody had given last week, and I don't remember who, but it was a great suggestion. Now, I realize sometimes you can't do that financially. It may be too big of a loan. It may be too much for you to handle. And in that case, what this is teaching us again is go to whoever gave that loan and ask to be taken out of the loan, ask to be given reprieve from it. They may not, but this is telling us to do that. And it's also saying don't get in the loan in the first place if you can. That's step one. But if you find yourself, try and get out of it. Did you have something you wanted? Oh, okay. I thought you were raising your hand. So So that's basically the last principle that we didn't cover there is, go to that person that gave you the loan and get out of it if possible. And if not, then, you may be in a situation where you have to deal with it over time. All right, so let's move on. Who'd like to read for me Proverbs 6 through 11? And it's up on the screen. Go ahead. Thank you.
Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like a armed man.
Awesome, thank you. So as we know, the next few proverbs that we're going to learn about here are basically lessons on the dangers that we as Christians might face that will trap us in cords of sin through folly, right? And this next proverb that we're talking about here, as you see, is another aspect of folly that we as Christians have to watch out for. We have to protect against. And this one is probably something each of us have struggled with at least once in our life, if we're honest about it. I know I have. And it's sloth, it's laziness. It's not doing what you should do when you know you should do it, right? In this section, it's kind of narrated in reverse order with verses 6 through 8 kind of outlining the solution is hard work. And while the problem of the lazy person or the sluggard is developed in verses 9 through 11. So it's kind of backwards. But the proverb here is what one scholar calls, Hamare calls a tokaha, a rebuke, a chastisement. And it's basically addressing somebody that's implicated as a sluggard, as somebody that's lazy, right? And the example here of the ant is given to shame the lazy man. And the question of how long, ad mate, is the formula of rebuke that scholar is mentioning. Usually when you see a rebuke in Proverbs, it will have something like that of how long are you going to do this? How long are you going to stay in this situation? How long are you going to follow this path, right? And it really operates at two levels here. The surface intention here is to kind of encourage the lazy person, the sluggard, as it's called, to hard work instead of doing nothing. But the setting here is kind of in the contrast of wisdom and folly again. And we see that again from chapters 1 through 9, as we've seen. This is all about folly. And what it's teaching us here is that this sluggardness, this laziness, is indeed folly as well. And those who don't, bother in pursuing wisdom is folly, right? And you can be lazy just as much in spiritually as you can physically, right? And so it's kind of given us that understanding that if we're chasing wisdom, that's doing the right thing. If we're being lazy and not chasing wisdom, again, all these chapters as we've led up to here have been about wisdom, right? A lot of it. And it's telling us that we can also be lazy here and not chase wisdom. And it's using, again, the ant as a way to show us that, like when it says, without having any chief, officer, or ruler. So it's kind of telling us, look, you can look to nature for an example of how to live. God's placed these things in nature for us to see examples of how we should, treat our life, how we should live. And with the ant, even though the ant has no chief, no officer, no person telling them what to do, they still build the anthill every day, don't they? And they do it now. It doesn't tell us why. It doesn't say they're doing it because that's ingrained in them, or because communally they're doing it for the community, or what. But it is telling us that the ant does their work every day. Without fail, there is no lazy ant. You can't find a lazy ant, right? And what it's trying to teach us is you should not be able to find a lazy Christian either. As a Christian, you should be always doing God's work and striving for God's wisdom. And ultimately, what this is telling us is this is a trap. It's a trap of folly. It's a trap that you can get kind of, and we've done it, I've done it, where you get lazy and then that lazy leads to lazy, right? I'm not going to do this today. And then, you know what? I'm just going to lay here all day, right? It starts off with, I'm not going to mow the yard today. And then it becomes, I don't need to read the Bible today either. And that's what this is getting at is, look, that laziness can lead to spiritual laziness just as much as anything else. And we have to be careful of that. The ant here in 7-8 draws attention again to the diligence or industriousness of the ants. And again, pointing out the significance of no ruler. And we should do it as well, not because it's what God expects of us, but we should do it because it's ingrained in who we are. We should be like an ant, is what it's getting at. And it also says here that the ant both prepares or builds up her food supply. And it's really the word that's used here in the NIV says it as stores her provisions rather than prepares her bread as in the ESV. And the ESV version tries to translate things as exactly as it can. And bread is the right translation, but the type of bread that it's talking about in the word that's used, general sense of it means food, right? Not just bread, which is why the NIV, I think, is a better translation there where it says provisions. And what it's talking about is she's always gathering, but during the time of harvest, she's gathering more. She's making sure she's ready for when it's lean times, right? And in the same thing with Christians, we should be gathering in the harvest when we can, right? When you see an opportunity to do more as a Christian, you should. Don't then look at that as, look, I got extra time this week. I'm going to take a break, right? Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with preparation.
Yes.
But too, a lot of it has to do with discipline because
Yes.
as I was mentioning with my daughter, when she has a little bit of money in her hands, her first thought is to go, get the things that she wants that are pleasurable.
Right.
As opposed to thinking, I might not have enough to do this in 30 days or 45 days or
Right.
60 days. Instead of putting it away, she'll use it and then be in need.
Right.
With this, because you're using wisdom, you're thinking ahead.
Yes.
And being prepared and not wasting.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that he used the ants as an example, because ants are pretty much brainless creatures that
Yeah.
just run on instinct.
Right.
And we have a free will that
Right.
gets in the way of that thinking.
True. True.
And that's what gets us off course. We
True.
Use our brain to focus on what's important.
Right.
We're caught up in our own little selfish ways.
Right. And it's kind of telling us that we should have that mindset of the ant, that we shouldn't allow our free will to get in the way of what we know we should do, right? Because even though it's the ant's mindless, as like you're saying, they're still doing what they need to do. And we, although we're not mindless, we do the opposite, or we tend to, right? And so it's trying to teach us that indeed we need to have kind of a mindset of an ant, that you look at the goal rather than, I don't want to do that today. You've got to look at, is the hill done? If the hill's not done, it's time to keep building. And our hill's not done, not until we're taken to heaven. Your hill isn't finished, right? None of us. So we all should be building like the ant every day. The sluggard here, the lazy person, is a stereotypical character, and we'll see it quite often in the book of Proverbs. You'll see it in verse 10:26, 13:4, 15:19, 19:24. I mean, I keep going. And then we see it at length in chapter 24 and chapter 26. So it's certainly something we're going to see over and over again, this principle of taking your time and using it wisely, and not wasting your time. And not being a sluggard, right? And the sluggard here is rebuked for lying down, for sleeping when there's work to be done, and wisdom to be pursued. Usually he's pictured as somebody that avoids doing any action. So like here, it says that he clasps his hands together. Well, can you do any work like this? No. Right? And that's the same thought process that we're getting across, or we should be getting from this verse, is that he's not going to get any work done laying in his bed like this. You're not doing anything. You're not pursuing wisdom. You're not doing any physical work or mental work at that point. And he says, well, I just need a little rest. And I know I've done that. I just need a little sleep, and then I sleep all day, right? And that's what it's saying is, look, it's easy to fall into that trap, that folly of allowing that laziness to grow. You start off with, I just need a little rest, to all day you wasted getting that little bit of rest. And ultimately it's saying what's going to happen. It sets out the consequences in verses 11, that poverty will come suddenly in the sluggard to the sluggard, and it'll be with ample warning, though, like being robbed by a thief or assaulted by an armed man. Neither the fruits of hard work nor the prize of wisdom is achieved by the one that is too lazy to act, to think, and become wise. So I think the practical lesson here is obvious. If we're lazy, ultimately we'll find poverty sneak up on us, and it'll be from our own doing. And I want you also to see the other level of meaning that I referred to already in talking about this, and that's the spiritual sloth of it. If you're not seeking wisdom, if you're not seeking God, if you're spiritually lazy, it says here the result's going to sneak up on you like a robber. Where else have we heard something that's going to sneak up on us like a robber, right? Like a thief in the night. I know we all know that verse, right? It's the second coming of God, right? Second coming of the Lord. So this is another clue here to the point of this is not just about working physically. It's about spiritual work. And the lesson is, if you're not doing God's work, his coming's going to sneak up on you like you didn't even know it happened. And he's going to say, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing what you were told to do? Aren't you supposed to be doing my work, not laying in bed like this, right? And that's what this is trying to get across, is this is not just about physical laziness or physical activity, but your activity for God. And as we know, the book of Proverbs has been telling us that we should be diligently seeking wisdom from the very first chapter. And this is something you'll see throughout Proverbs. It's going to give us ample understanding that this is a book about following God and finding wisdom from God. So we should look at sloth here. It's teaching us as a sin. Affects us fully and wholly, right? And it'll come upon us with unperceived power. It'll grow. And so we've got to be careful. Incessant watchfulness is what this is telling us. We've got to constantly be on the lookout for sloth or laziness sneaking up on us and to overtaking us, right? And again, if all of us are honest, we've all done this at least once in our life. I know I have, more than once. And I'm not proud of it. But it is something that you've got to be watchful of. You've got to look out for. And it's work, right? It's just like anything else. It's work, just like the ant. It's work. You've got to work hard at not being lazy. You've got to work hard at doing God's work. Be employed early and work for God. Store useful knowledge in your mind. All of that is work. And it's reminding us as Christians, the part of the work that we need to do is the work of chasing wisdom, seeking to better understand God. So you can be a sluggard and not stop doing things. You can still be a sluggard in what this is teaching. Whether you could be hard at work and still be a sluggard under the definition of the spiritual sluggard. Yeah.
I think this too is a real reminder that we're creatures of habit.
Yes.
We have to make a real effort to change our habits.
Yes.
Not get caught up in the same old.
Yes. Exactly. And the example of the ant is the picture of that. They are creatures of habit. They do the same thing over and over again. So absolutely right. Yeah.
I was going to say, particularly, it says that you have to do something repeatedly for at least 25 days for it to become your habit.
Right. True. Very true. And we're going to talk in a minute when we get to the next verses about you do what you love, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. But that's what the next proverb is all about. It kind of leads into that. But absolutely right. Absolutely right. So, and that's kind of, let's go ahead and look at that. So I want to get to where my notes are. This is the other side of that, is you do what you love, right? This is not telling us we can't have a hobby. It's not telling us that we can't have fun. We should have fun. We should have hobbies. We should do those things that we want to do. But at the same time, it is telling us that you can truly see what somebody loves by observing their life. If you see an ant, that ant loves building the anthill. That ant loves doing what's right for the community of ants, right? And that's its love, because that's what it does all day long. And if someone were to look at our lives, would they look at our lives and say, he really loves God? Or would they say, he really loves cars, because his head's always underneath the hood? And that's ultimately what another thing it's trying to get across to us is it's okay to have those hobbies, but the first and foremost love in your life should be God. And so if you're not chasing God as much as you are those other things, you need to think about that. And you need to understand that that may not be the right path. Because at some point, what you're going to find again is Jesus is going to come. And it's going to sneak up on you like a thief in the night. While you're, doing whatever that hobby is, whether it be working on cars or racing cars or doing model airplanes or, who knows. But the point is or video games, right? Some people, that's their hobby. I used to play video games as well, but we've just got to be careful that we don't allow those things to get in the way of our pursuit of knowledge of God. And that's ultimately the spiritual side of this lesson. All right, so let's answer the discussion question here. How is sloth or laziness sinful? And how can we make sure our life reflects God as our first love rather than something else? Thoughts on that? Yeah.
I feel like it's sinful because it's a waste of the resource that the Lord has given us, what God has given us, which is time. He gives us time and we're supposed to, for the word, redeem the time, and to use it wisely. We're supposed to be using it specifically to do His work and to spread the knowledge of His kingdom. And so, if we're not doing that, because that's a commandment, that's not a suggestion.
Right.
If we're not doing what the word says and we're being lazy, it's sinful.
Yes. You're literally doing the opposite of what God tells you. Yeah.
We're not using our gifts and talents.
Right.
We're just wasting them away.
Right. And remember, each of us are given, according to Ephesians, each of us are given different gifts for the church, different gifts for the whole body, right? And if you're being a sluggard and you are the arm for that church, how does that church properly function, right? Did somebody else over there, I think, raise their hand? No. So yeah, indeed. The other side of that for me is, as far as how I look at it as being sinful is, look at the gift that God gave us, right? Look at every day, it's a gift. Each day is a new gift. And by us not using the gift that we're given, we cheapen His work, right? We say to Him, that's not good enough. What you did's not good enough, or at least that's the way I feel, right? And so that's what pushes me to try and never waste time. Yeah.
Not a lot of people realize that they have a spiritual gift and what it is.
True. Very true. But if you never use it, you'll never find it either. And that's where a lot of people, they don't know it because they don't use it. They don't even try. They're scared a lot of times. And that fear is put in your head, not by God. Fear is from Satan. Satan doesn't want you to know your gift. So if, indeed.
Try to pray and then trying different things.
Yeah.
Until it's just like, this is it.
Yep, exactly. You'll find, what you'll find is the path that's laid out for you will be the path that you keep being pushed to, right? It's like a pinball. I know that's probably a weird analogy for God's providence, but it is. He keeps banging your ball until it goes in the chute He wants it to go in. And what you'll find is you'll get pushed in the direction you're supposed to go. Now, a lot of times we fight against that. We're like the gravity, right, in the pinball machine. We fight against where, He's trying to direct us. And usually He has to redirect us more than once until we get where we're supposed to go. But that's, again, a lot of that is fear. People are afraid of the path that God's laid out for them, or they think they know a better way. And so they tend to veer from the path. But good point. Good point. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I know from, again, experience that we need to tap into or listen to the wisdom that other people have, because
Yes.
they can see where what our gift might be.
Yes.
And therefore, we need to listen to those who have that godly wisdom.
Yes.
And Scripture tells us that.
Yes.
Seek godly wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's from others. And I think that's a hard place to be also, that it's in your face when you actually hear it from somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jimmy Morton, he's an example of mine that when the pastor asked me to be a part of the staff in the children's ministries, and I was like, oh, me? Really?
Right.
You know, and but evidently the pastor must have seen something, because I
Sure.
was already volunteering.
Right.
Volunteering in different positions. And, you know, Cindy and Jimmy a lot of times are just my spiritual bouncing off of people.
Right.
And Jimmy said, well, Karen, you've got the energy for it.
Right.
I think that's the words he said. You know, you've got the energy for it, because I was mentioning, well, this person could do that, and this person could do it better than me, you know, and those kinds of things. And that's when Jimmy says, you know, but Karen, you've got the energy for
Right.
it.
Right.
You know, so God had, you have to listen to godly people that
Exactly.
the Lord has put in your path.
A good example of that is Paul when he was on the ship, right? Remember the story of the shipwreck, right? And Paul was the only one telling them, don't go that way. This is a really bad idea, right? And they all went with the world that told them the opposite. Oh, no, that's okay. And then they got shipwrecked, right? So yeah, it's certainly, and that's another example of the lesson you're talking about, is we should listen to the counsel of godly men, or women for that matter, and not discount what they have to say, because usually what they're telling us is not just from them, as you mentioned. Yeah.
I work in healthcare, and about a year, about 6 months ago, I was taking a change in my job.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the past, you know, and I realized, you know, when God put me in a different place in my life, and not knowing what to do, I went to people, ladies within the church. But I found out, and even talking to Pastor Jim, God puts you where He wants you to be.
Oh, certainly.
And before that, I was looking for being involved in the senior ministry of this church.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like Karen said and others, Pastor Jim told me, he said, your job is a ministry. You taking care of the people every day.
Mm-hmm.
You're making them smile every day.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's
And
awesome.
he said, God puts you where He wants you to be.
That's absolutely right.
And if God wanted you to move to, when you got a change of your job, if He wanted you to go somewhere else, He would lead you down that path.
Right. Right. That's exactly what we're saying. That the path that God wants you on, you'll see He keeps nudging you. Right? He'll nudge you in that path. And we fight it a lot of times, but He nudges you. But it's smart of you to get, yeah, smart of you that you got counsel from other people.
So many people, like Reagan and so many others, gave me, and Pastor Jim gave me the guidance, and I've been in my job 15 years.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I've been there for over 20 years.
That's awesome. And they're right. You know, we each of us have that opportunity wherever you're at, and you should. It's not just an opportunity, but you should speak about your faith and about God. Yeah, Jim.
Charles, everyone does have a gift.
Mhm.
Everyone does have a talent. And when the statement was made, not Catherine made it, a lot of people don't know. Most Christians don't know
Right.
what their gift and talent is. That comes through discipleship. And when Jesus told His disciples, He didn't say, say go out into the world and save everybody.
Right.
He said go and make disciples.
Right.
And a disciple is one who studies after, hungers for,
Yes.
and God reveals through other people at that time what the gift of the Spirit is.
Right.
Gift and the talent. But we as a church fail to do that,
Yes.
to lead people in discipleship.
Yes.
You can't, it's one of those things you can't have too much of.
Oh, I agree.
So we need, if we've been in church for a while and we are considered mature Christians, we do need to be working with the younger ones or
Yes.
those that have grown in faith.
Yes.
Because that's discipleship.
Yes.
And that's where we learn those things, like gifts and talents.
Exactly. Each of us have a duty, as you're saying, to open ourselves up to helping others in the faith. And again, it's something that we talked about, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. Each of us are at a different point in the path, right? Each of us are at a different point in the journey with Christ. And so you're probably further along than the person next to you, right? You might be. The point I'm making is, if you're further along, it's your duty to help them to get where you're at, right? And exactly what you're talking about, the way you do that is through discipleship. The way you do that is through taking them under your wing, so to speak, right? Just like Jesus did with his disciples. He taught them, he brought them with him on his journey, right? And you need to bring people on your journey with you. And that's indeed the same exact thing. Good point, Jimmy. Yeah.
And conversely, people need to be open to being disciples.
True.
They need to realize that they haven't made it yet. That
Right.
they still have some things to learn and some places to be sharpened.
Right.
And so be open to having somebody speak into your life with wisdom and try to apply the wisdom that they're giving you.
Right. Very true. Very true. Sometimes we have to humble ourselves, right? And a lot of what we'll see in Proverbs is about that, is that you have to humble yourself. You have to be willing to accept that good counsel. And that's hard to do, like you said. It truly is. Awesome discussion. All right, let's move on to our next verse since we got a little bit of time. We can hopefully get through it. This is the third snare here is about troublemakers, right? The third folly. And it's called The Nefarious Insurrectionist by Waltke in one of his books. And it's been introduced in the book of Proverbs before this. We've talked about troublemakers before, but it's given its rightful spot here in full in the study of folly. And the image here that we get is of crooked speech. It's the same that's used to describe wicked speech in verse 424, and it also echoes the description of the unruly men that we saw in verses chapter 2 with the crooked mouth, etc. But let's go ahead and read 6:12 through 15, then we'll talk about it a little bit more. Yes?
I'd like to read it from the version that I have, the CSB.
Okay.
It says, a worthless person, a wicked man, goes around speaking dishonestly, winking his eyes, and signaling with his feet, and gesturing with his fingers. He always plots evil with perversity in his heart. He stirs up trouble. Therefore, calamity will strike him suddenly, and he will be shattered instantly beyond repair.
And a lot of my notes are about exactly what your version did there, and it's kind of expounding upon, because again, like I mentioned earlier, the ESV version tends to give you the exact literal translation, and you sometimes miss some of the meaning or the intended meaning with that if you don't look into it a little bit. So good that you read it from that version for this. The third thing here that we're talking about is the troublemaker, and again, crooked speech is usually the way they work, right, with deceit through the mouth, right, crooked speech, and it refers to speaking untruth, fraudulent speech. At the same time, it describes here a physical contortion, a twisting of the mouth that it's like that, right. So it's a physical connotation that it gives you there of what it's saying. And basically, the thought here is kind of to reveal the underlying moral distortion in that person, right? They're crooked in their mouth. They're crooked in their ways. They're crooked, right? It's to kind of give you that idea that this is a crooked person, not just they like this with their mouth or in their eyes, right? And also, we'll see many times in the Bible, many times in Proverbs, that it will tell us basically, it'll use a triad of body zones, right? Heart and eyes, mouth and ears, hands and feet. And it's trying to imply your total personality, who you are as a person in totality, right? And the eye, we'll see through the different proverbs in the Bible here, the eye is at the point of entry to the will. Whose organ is the heart, the hands and the feet put the will into action, and the mouth gives expression to thought and will. And this basically is telling us here that ultimately this person is crooked in their speech. They're crooked in their every way. Did my computer just crash? Wonderful. Okay, there it goes. It's back. Sorry about that. It's acting wonky. But anyway, so again, the whole point here is it's trying to get you to see that they're not right? And usually somebody that's a troublemaker, they may seem like they're, like everybody else, but it's the kind of person here that does this in a very surreptitious way, right? They are purposefully trying to create trouble within the church, within the community, whatever. Yeah.
I have employees who are CNA,
Mm-hmm.
very efficient, careful with my job, and I was known for that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be quick in that job, but you also have to be efficient.
Right.
And have a lot of care. And I had 2 new students that had come in, and I would train the new ones, and they didn't like the way it worked. So they took it upon themselves to be disrespectful towards me. They had jealousy.
Right.
And they went to the boss and said that I was cussing them out, and I was just disrespectful, and I wasn't given enough care. I was too quick in my job, so they weren't getting the correct care. And because of my reputation there, they brought us all in together and basically told them they're liars.
Right.
We know
Good.
this girl, and the residents know this girl, and there's no way.
Good.
So they got fired.
Good. And ultimately, that's exactly the kind of person they're describing here, is that you dealt with there. The kind of person that's looking to harm you for some reason. And sometimes they're out to get something. Sometimes they're just a wicked person, and they like doing this, right? There are people, and I know we've met people that are like this, that just like stirring stuff up for the fun of it. And I don't know how it's fun, but they seem to think it is. Yeah.
Where her and I used to work up in Washington, that was the mentality at our jobs, was people, instead of being a team, they're all about themselves, and they will watch you fail.
Right.
Instead of being a brother or sister and picking you up,
Right.
they watch you fail just to gain.
Right. Right.
And it's sad, because all you can do is pray for them, and hope that situation changes. But yeah, it's a depressing thing.
Sure.
That our society is.
Sure. And unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse, right? And this is something we're going to see consistently, right? We live in a land of deceit. And so now, if you live in a land of deceit, guess what? The people that love deceit are going to be more prevalent. And so the person that uses wicked speech, wicked lies to get their way, this is they love it, right? So you're going to tend to see more of it, unfortunately. The squinting of the eyes was considered, and it still is really, a symptom of hostile thoughts, right? It reveals somebody's malicious pleasure in doing something. Proverbs 10:10 talks about that, and it says it causes unhappiness. One who plans deceit is said to have closed his eyes in Proverbs 16:30. The book of Job says that his enemy sharpens his eyes against me, Job 16:9. Since there are not many gestures the eyes can make, this is kind of referring to like a, you know how when people, they're mad, they do that's the kind of gesture it's talking about. And I know, right? I'm giving you my eye gestures, but that's ultimately what it's talking about, sharp eyes, right? Like knives. And according to one of the apocryphal books, it says, "He who makes hints with the eye devises evil, and those who know him will avoid him. In your presence he speaks sweetly and admires your words, but later he will twist his mouth, and with your own words he will place a stumbling block." So again, this is talking about the same thing, this kind of person that's going to use your words and try and trip you up, use them against you, just for the fun of it. So back then, this would have been looked at, just like it is today, a hostile gesture, a squinting gaze, right? And the Greek translators also here understood the other gestures, like your translation you gave, doesn't necessarily mean like, winks in a nice way. That wink is a more of a, like we just talked about, a knife kind of wink. And then with the where it says that he signals with his feet, some scholars have said that they thought that meant he was signaling to a cohort, right? Somebody else. But when you look at the Greek, and most scholars believe that it's not meaning that, he signals with his feet like he's shifty. He's shaky, he's nervous, right? You know how when you get nervous, you shake your leg, right? That's what it's talking about if you look deep down into the Greek here. It's not that he's trying to make a signal in the sand for somebody else, right? And also, again, points with his finger. The point with his finger there is meant to construe like I may come to you and say, what are you, weak? Are you a wimp? Is that why you won't go beat him up? Are you a wuss? Right? That's the kind of the thought there, is you're pointing out somebody else at somebody else to try and point them towards evil by using evil, right? And you're using kind of an insult, if not an insult, kind of like a gesture of trying to push them towards evil. Is kind of what it's talking about there with pointing with your finger.
Charles, I kind
Yeah.
of think of with your feet, you're trying to trip somebody up.
That too.
I don't want you to be successful, I'm gonna trip you up.
Right.
Just like,
Exactly.
some of us.
Exactly. And that's the kind of person this is talking about. And it's saying that we've got to watch for that person because they're everywhere. And in our world today, again, as we've discussed, they're getting worse and worse, and it's coming more and more. We see here ultimately that it's telling us that it's going to lead to calamity, though. That they are going to find that through all of this, just like your example, through all of this, especially if they're trying to do this against a righteous person, what they're going to find is their calamity will come upon them suddenly. In a moment, they will be broken beyond healing, meaning they won't be able to come back from it, right? They're not going to be able to continue to give you that wickedness. Yeah.
To go with that story, one of the girls had to stay behind for about a couple of weeks because they wanted to give her a try.
Mhm.
And she had a headline out. She had probably been scared. And like I said, I don't hold it against people.
Shouldn't.
Hold it against me. And so I went to walk over to her car, and she was so worried or scared that she almost got back in her car.
Right.
And I was like, I'm just letting you know that you have a headlight out.
Right.
She was like, whoa, okay, thank you.
Well, people that do wicked things expect wicked things.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I was like, wow.
Right.
I've said maybe 5 words to you, and you're scared.
Well, it's good that you understand. Don't hold it, right? Don't hold it in. Don't hold things against people, right? Many people are deceived, and that's why they're in that situation, right? They think that's the way. There was a point in time in my life where I thought the only way to be successful was to destroy you, and I would, if that's what it took for me to go above you on the ladder. I'd stomp you down till you were done. And that's not the way, right? But I was deceived. I thought it was. And so I'm glad that, or I hope that people wouldn't hold that against me either. I know God doesn't. And that's a maturity thing. When you get to a point to where you can say, look, I don't hold it against you. You tried to trip me up here. You tried to get me, fired or whatever. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to redeem yourself. That's a maturity thing, and that takes time. It's not easy though. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Not a minute, probably our next proverb, because we're running out of time. But it's about forgiveness and truly forgiving somebody. There's a big difference between forgiving somebody with conditions and forgiving somebody. We'll talk about that probably next week. Yeah.
To her credit, one of the things that we're supposed to do as Christians too is
to live a life that's above reproach.
Yes.
So when people do bring those things, because the world will bring those things against you,
Yes.
they won't be believed because people know your character.
Exactly.
Your reputation precedes you.
Exactly.
And that's one of our responsibilities as well, not to fall into the folly of living below
Right.
what
Right.
the Christian standard is.
Exactly. And that goes back to, again, the ant, doesn't it? Because if you're always living for Christ, it's obvious in your life. And again, that what you love is what you chase, right? And others will see that. I can give you example after example of things exactly like that, where people, they know you're a Christian, right? So they're going to come to you. They may hate you for everything else. They're going to come to you when they want the truth, because they know you're going to give them the truth, right? They may try and mess with you any other time, but then they're going to come to you. And I can tell you example after example of that, because they know you're not going to lie. And then they rely upon the fact that you're a Christian and won't lie. And that again goes back to what you're saying, that you were not held as the lie would have had you held, right? Because they knew you. They knew your character. They knew who you were. And yes, it's our responsibility, because we represent not just us, we represent Christianity and God in everything that we do. So we're at the end of class, so we'll end here. Watch out for the wicked people, but again, don't hold that in your heart. Understand many times they are deceived, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. Let's have a prayer, and then we'll end our class. Who'd like to say a prayer for me? We'll do it, go. All right.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful Sunday, and I thank you for this room full of wonderful, God-fearing people. We thank you for the word of Proverbs today. And my prayer is that you reach into each of our hearts and our minds and open it up so that we can absorb every bit of what we have learned, so that we can be a light to others and share what we learned today onto others. Don't let us be deceived by Satan and let him rule our lives. My prayer is that he is rebuked and he is out of our lives, out of our homes. I pray that the sermon today is also knowledgeable for us, that wisdom comes out and we absorb every bit of it, and we can live it today and moving forward. Once again, I thank you for today. I thank you for Charles, and I pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. I'll see you in the services, and see you all next week as well. God bless.
Careful now.